every landowner, every man who owned land had an army. These were the people who lived on the land, who worked the land, the peasants. They were his serfs, you could say. Remember, this is the medieval period. It's the period of the people who live on the land being essentially owned by the owner of the land. And these people were his people, and they were trained to be fighters. So every ruler, whether he was a king of a large area or a duke of a small area, had his own army. And these were the armies of the Christian world. If they were big dukes, like Duke William of Normandy, of course he had a very large army, and tens of thousands of soldiers. But there could be smaller ones who had an army of 5,000. All of these armies could be told. You know, when Pope Innocent III said, look, I want you to go with your armed men and fight those dissident Christians, they went. Now, I'm not saying everybody went, but he could command armies. He could command armies. You know, not every one of these wars was over a very extensive area. Not every one of them lasted very long. I mean, the war against the Albigensians did not last very long. Once they organized all of the armies, and they went down there, and they did the job, and they killed out these people, and they came back home. Of course, war disrupts, and disrupts the economy, always. And one real rule of a war is if you go to war and you lose, you really disrupt your economy. Yes, if you won a war, your economy improved because you took loot and you took when you won a war. And you know, whoever won a war up to the 20th century kept whatever he took. In fact, up to the United Nations, whoever won a war kept whatever he took. Now it's different. But in the medieval times, if you went to war and you won a war, then you came away with loot and you won. If you went to war and you lost, then you were in deep trouble. You know, religion was the propaganda which drove these wars. You could say, why did, you know, nowadays we would say, why did the Catholic Church have to kill out non-conformist Christians? Why did they have to kill out Protestants? Today we find it difficult to understand. But to them it was a matter of life and death, just as even a place like Bob Jones University can still say, you know, everyone who's, what was it, I think even the leading candidate of the Republicans said some time ago that whoever doesn't believe in Jesus Christ doesn't go to heaven. You know, these are attitudes. You see, many historians will say the Crusades had a good effect. I suppose you could say, yeah, not the expected effect, but there was an effect. One thing they discovered, the Europeans discovered as a result of the Crusades, is that the Arab Muslims were superior in technology. And so the Crusades led to a rise in Western European improvement of their technology, and eventually led to what came to be the Renaissance. But it's gradual, one thing after another. But the fact is that the Crusades taught the Western Europeans that they had a lot to learn, that they were very backward. And the Arab Muslims of certain areas had developed a highly efficient technology, which Europe didn't have. Well, superior weapons. I mean, their swords and spears were far superior. Their steel manufacturing was superior. Their tactics were far superior. I mean, Saladin evidently knew how to organize an army that could encircle and defeat another army, you know, and also he could call upon many more because he had a large, what we call, background of men he could call upon. And by the way, Saladin himself was a conqueror of the Muslims. He came from Kurdistan, you know, Turkish, Kurdish, that area, and he conquered the Arabs of Syria and eventually established his empire over Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. That was a big conquest. He was a conqueror of the Arabs, but then he conquered the Christians. By that time, he was very powerful. So that is the Crusades, essentially, which ushered in a new period and also started this terrible upsetting and destruction of Jewish communities in Western Europe. One of the great events was the destruction of the Jewish communities of Western Europe in the middle of the 13th century. a lot of things happened as a result of that. You know, the hostility of the Christians against the Jews seemed to escalate under the impact of many factors, including the militant Christian orders. For example, in addition to the fact that Jews were attacked for economic reasons, you could say, yes, we understand that, there was also an ongoing campaign that Jewish literature was anti-Christian and therefore should be condemned, censored, and destroyed. It's interesting because, you see, when you get to literature and you get to things like that, the Jews lived by Jewish law. All Jewish communities throughout history until 1800 lived by Jewish law. This was expected. This is what the empires and the kingdoms wanted. This is what the Jews preferred. So Jews always lived by Jewish law within their communities. Jewish law predominated. Of course, they would have to adjust to the law of the country under certain conditions and circumstances, but Jewish communities lived by Jewish law. Jewish law is embodied in a whole body of literature, basically known as the Talmud. And the Talmud is Jewish jurisprudence. It is the corpus juris of the Jewish community. It deals with all aspects of life. Jews lived by it. So when Jews had a problem and they went to court and the judges of the court were experts in the Talmud, this is how Jewish law operated. This is how the Jewish community operated. For some reason, the people who could not read the Talmud, couldn't understand it, they got it into their head that the Talmud was filled with anti-Christian propaganda. And so campaigns against the Talmud began to proliferate. And they reached a point in 1260 where the Dominicans convinced the King of France, Louis IX, that he must, first of all, get rid of the Jews and get rid of all their literature. And Louis IX dedicated himself to the Fourth Crusade, but first he said he's going to cleanse France of its contamination, which meant he's going to get rid of all the Jews, confiscate their property, and get rid of the Jews. And also, they told him they have to burn the Talmud. So they decided to raid the Jewish community and confiscate all the books in the Jewish community. Now, every book before 1450 was handwritten. You know that. Talking about manuscripts. They collected 24 carloads full of Jewish manuscripts from all over Paris and northern France. And they brought them to the Place de la Concorde. And they built the great Bonfire of Paris and burned 24 carloads of Jewish books. That was one of the great disasters of that period. And then, of course, the expulsion of the Jews from France, which led to a great migration of the Jews into Eastern Europe. We'll get to that next time.